There's a number of developers who want to build a lot of mass timber right now, 10 million square feet. Based on the growth rates we've seen, I think it's somewhere, depending on who you talk to, between 35 and 43% year over year growth. And right now, I believe, over the next 4 years, we're on a precipice of a much larger growth explosion as this becomes from niche market to a really standardized product. And what's going to limit that demand is production capacity. I think there will be a significant number of new entrants, both on the west and east coast of North America, also the US South. And these entrants, some will be existing groups adding a new plant, and some will be brand new business entities who are looking to explore different parts of the value chain. I think there's a lot of changes that we're going to see happen in the next 5 years for different companies, and we'll see a difference between sort of the leaders and the laggers. And one key part of that to me is going to be
This is the Mass Timber Group Show. I'm Brady, and today I caught up with Nick Sills, a mass timber guru and principal of Whirlwind Consultants. Nick's passionate about the entire mass timber value chain, from the forest through the factory and back out into building design. He takes his 20 years of experience working with the biggest players in the industry, and he helps companies decide how and when to enter the mass timber space. Fiber analysis, HR, capital costs, plant design, product development, business cases and models. He's the guy with the answers. But before we jump in, if you want to learn more about building multifamily mass timber buildings and meet other teams doing the same, we're hosting the second annual Mass Timber Group Summit this August in Denver. We've got 30 plus sessions, 3 amazing networking parties, and building tours of the coolest projects in Denver designed to give you the tools that you need to win more projects and level up your career. Check out the link in the show notes below for more info. And if you like these podcasts, subscribing to the channel is the biggest compliment you can give us. It helps us book incredible guests like Nick and brings more mass timber awareness to the rest of the world. So with that, let's get into it.
I grew up in the mountains of British Columbia around beautiful timber frame homes. My father was a timber framer. I worked my early years in life as a laborer on those projects, and I was just inspired by being around the forest and the mountains and building those buildings. That led me to go undertake some wood science degrees, further that with a master's of timber engineering. And that brought me to some time with structural. So it's a big process to get to the first step in the door. And then I started working, actually I worked with structure craft for 1 year, which I would comment really inspired me to show me what mass timber was. That was before we had standardized buildings. So we just done a project like the Richmond Olympic Oval, giant speed skating oval for the 2010 Winter Olympic Games. But those inspirations just stuck with me, that concept of structural integrity and honesty to the materials. Following that through, ended up in Europe and then back with Structural when CLT was just coming into North America here, and took that journey moving forward there. That's my personal journey. But in the background, I think it's really important to note, the trees in the forest are all around us. There's trees that are 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 years old. That's older than the pyramid. That's hard to believe that, there's trees older than the hunk of stone out there. And that's just so inspirational to me. And then moving on from that, we have more modern construction, maybe not modern yet, but in the 1800s, we had this brick and beam construction take off in North America. Large sections of Douglas fir, maple, kind of sort of like a light timber brace frame, you could call it that back in the day, and then brick infill in between with NLT decking. And large amounts of, New York, Toronto, Vancouver, Seattle were built in this style. And many of those legacy buildings were the new inspiration for what has become modern mass timber in North America, where groups looked at these, 9 and 10 story tall buildings and said, well, we did it back in 1950. Why can't we do it again now? And the codes are just catching up again. And thank you to all the amazing architects and engineers who brought us there with their visions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's always very inspirational, like you said, to look at what's being done around the world, what has been done, and then what we will be doing. I think when you can combine the best of all of those different aspects, like you're moving in the right direction. And so when you first got into the mass timber world, what were you doing for these companies?
Yeah. So with Structurecraft, I started as a project manager, just a junior project manager, which at the time mostly meant doing logistics optimizations of really weird curvy beams on crazy steering dolly trucks and stuff down tight streets. And when I worked with Structureland, I actually came in as a fabrication design manager. So with a background in timber engineering from the Bern University of Applied Sciences, had to try and figure out how we could make CLT work in North America, given the different cost metrics, the different construction knowledge, the different degrees of, industrial standardization, which are all still relevant topics today. But I really believe we found our own path in North America that doesn't represent the same path that Europe has evolved.
And what has that path been so far? I mean, like when you said like the codes are catching up, so we know that mass timber, in our North American world is pretty recent, like less than a decade, right? In major popular areas. How did it get started? And then can you kind of like give us a history from where it started and then bring us to the present day and what that evolution has looked like?
Yeah. So mass timber, or at the time, more freely named heavy timber, has been in codes for Canada and the US for a while. Generally speaking, any member was over 4 inches in every direction is considered heavy timber. And that was related to fire ratings, which relates back to the old code, why timber kind of got pushed out with uh, large fires that happened. But that was more due to building offsets, lots of small members, they just had stuff everywhere. There's no standardization or process. So first, we came in with really restrictive codes that kind of removed all those brick and beam structures I was talking about between the 1950s and 1940s. They were difficult to build. But over time, we saw when there was fires in these really large mass timber, not lightwood trim stuff, those buildings weren't damaged as much in fire. We have evidence that this stuff held up. And then as the codes and these discussions started to grow, we said, well, if the timber is big enough, it's just going to char and protect itself. And we can figure out how to do, the right lot line setbacks and the right firewalls and make all this work while respecting life and building integrity there.
Hey, we're going to get back to the podcast in just a second. But first, I have a question for you. Are you somebody looking to build a mass timber project? If the answer is yes, then you need to put together an experienced team.
Our partners at Cornerstone Timber Frames are leaders in heavy timber construction and have 30 plus years of experience, which means you can trust them to get the job done right.
They collaborate with Nordic Structures to bring you the highest quality FSC certified mass timber available. They also have some of the most advanced fabrication technology in the industry, so your project goes up smoothly without costly on-site modification or delays.
That means they have the experience, network, and technology to make your next mass timber project a success. Learn more about Cornerstone Timber Frames by clicking the link in the show notes below.
Why are they approaching it differently, either from a codes perspective or from designing it? Because you and I know that there are things that are different, but why did it take such a shift to say like, hey, this isn't the same as stick frame. It doesn't have the same, obviously it doesn't have the same structural capacity, but it doesn't have the same risk for fire damage. Like how did that evolution go from like, okay, we're recognizing that mass timber is different than even heavy timber, and that this is why we can then go and build these bigger structures that we're doing with it today?
Yeah. I think it's a very complex question with a lot of answers built into there. But a couple of the ones that come top of head there are, the scientific process, the rigor behind there is just so much more valuable and in depth now that we can really prove out the safety of these instead of it just being what I would call tribal knowledge. That back then, I think they knew, the timber charted at a certain rate and it was okay if we did that, but it wasn't codified in any ways. There was no strict standards. Or there probably was. I'm just not aware of them. And now we have much more in-depth scientific knowledge, testing, and process to prove, we've done 4-hour fire tests on multi-story buildings and proven that the fire self-extinguishes. And as long as you respect the other code conditions, it's a safe, very safe building. Another big important part was, the resources available at the time. North America, there was a lot of virgin forest at that time, and large sections of forest were harvested with really big structural members, really big trees are using that are all solid timber. There's not much of that available anymore, and it should probably all be preserved. And that's where mass timber comes in, that we are using much smaller sections of wood that's grown in a regenerative, sustainable manner and then glued together. So now we enabled to use our more modern fiber baskets in a sustainable manner instead of harvesting these old large timbers. And then the other thing is, at the time, steel and concrete were still in their infancy and they grew out. They had their heyday, I would argue now, and we're coming back to more amazing and sustainable materials. One thing that often just blows me away, I often walk in the woods, but you plant a tree, turn around for 20 years, turn back, and you have a giant structural member there, beautiful tree that is really made out of sunlight, water, and air or CO2, like three main ingredients. And you get a physical member. It's absolutely mind blowing when you really think about that and put that together. And then we could do whatever we want with that member with the right technology, engineering, and vision behind it.
Yeah, I like to use the catchphrase that mass timber buildings are solar powered. Like it's kind of like tongue in cheek, right? With like really, it's like the sun grew your building, right? You didn't have to go
Yeah.
mine it out of the earth or whatever. And so where do you think that most of the mass timber opportunity is right now, as far as like building typologies, maybe even regions, and as far as like what we can do with our current manufacturing infrastructure?
Yeah. So I've had the great privilege of working with companies across North America and even in Europe. And there's certainly an expertise division on the West Coast, within the Pacific Northwest. And that will continue to be a solid portion of the market. But we're really starting to see things in the US South and East Coast come together as there's more I think there's just more passion behind it and people are seeing what they could do with timber. So it's building that culture. We can build in wood and we can build really good in wood. And that's what's coming together as people have seen the possibilities that have been illustrated in other areas. So that's on the market side, but more in terms of what does the future look like for mass timber? I think there's a lot of changes that we're going to see happen in the next 5 years for different companies. And we'll see a difference between sort of the leaders and the laggers in the industry. And one key part of that to me is going to be schedule certainty. So I believe the leaders in the industry are going to have an integrated industry 4.0 system. So industry 4.0 is termed as a fourth industrial revolution around the Internet of Things. Gets really complicated and scary with lots of robots, but really it's perfect information up and down the fabrication chain. So if you came to me with a building quote today and you had a rough design, hopefully you've done it in a 3D model. That's another thing I'd like to see. But we turn it into a 3D model, we feed that into our system, and we can figure out where are the trees coming from, what's the processing time, how much lumber is there, what grades of lumber, how is that going to be put together, what are the costs of all this, and what time is that going to come out at the end of the factory, and have that within 95% certainty. And maybe I'm crazy and thinking we'll be there in 5 years, but I really think the teams that lean harder into that are going to be the strong leaders in the industry.
Yeah, I completely agree. I recently was talking to a manufacturer, and that was kind of like one of their big main focal points and communication points is like that's the direction that they wanted to go, right? Because that's where the industry is heading, and they want to be front. They want to be leading that charge, right? And be recognized as a leader in that space. Do you think that there are uh, any sort of building typologies that really excel and shine with the use of mass timber compared to, say, another typology?
I think we're on the process of developing these new building typologies. And what we have, and it's hard to realize, is we have a legacy of building typologies that are built for steel and concrete. And we've fit the architectural formwork to develop that and make those the standards. So in commercial buildings, the standard's sort of like 30-foot by 30-foot grid, 9 meters by 9 meters. That's a standard based on the structural system and its strengths and its come out. And now it is so standardized that it's difficult to adjust it. Mass timber can play in that exact realm. It's maybe not the perfect spot for it, but we are certainly starting to see those mass timber typologies come forward with the posted platform. I think there's has to be, 6 buildings in North America and another 12 buildings in Europe being built with that this year, as opposed to in 2018, Brock Commons was sort of the first and only one out there to demonstrate this point supported CLT. Along with that, I think we're going to see a lot more evolution in residential structures that aren't point supported, but kind of a hybrid of those various systems. And then I'd say we'll see a lot more commercial right now, but with the general financial markets and other things out there, there's other larger factors at play, but maybe within 2 years that have some form of resurgence.
A couple years ago, I raised my hand and I asked a question: how can we use this to build housing? And I was basically shut down and said, "It doesn't work here. Don't ask that question. And that's not what mass timber is for." Fast forward, I want to say less than 2 years, and you already mentioned some of the biggest, most prominent buildings out there, and they are residential slash housing buildings, right? Student residences. There's many affordable housing residences, hospitality uses, and then just general, market rate condos. Why or how did that shift happen? And then how do you think that with the lessons learned and those typologies that we're kind of in systems that we're figuring out right now, like where do you see residential mass timber going?
Yeah. So the first steps to how did that shift happen? First, we needed to demonstrate that we could actually do it. Then we needed to demonstrate cost parity, if not cost being better on costs than traditional methods. And that was a whole bunch of factors coming together, including the speed of install. And then the third part is probably the hardest one that we're still going through is that reliability of supply chain. There's a number of developers who want to build a lot of mass timber right now, 10 million square feet. But their question is, okay, if I want to go build this new development and I have, call it 15 towers in there, all 12 stories tall, who's going to supply that all at once? One company can maybe do that, but it's a lot. And they're kind of waiting to jump their boat in when there's 3 or 4 companies that can all do it and they can spread that risk. And that's really this next precipice I think we're coming over in the next 2 years. We'll start seeing very large, public and private projects going up that are collections of buildings. We've already seen some campuses go together, but larger campuses of residential structures that will start happening based on the supply chain has been de-risked, and you can buy it more as a normal product, and it's not a niche product anymore with 1 or 2 companies. There's 10 companies that can supply the product to you in North America.
So on the de-risking and like the certainty aspect from a developer owner's perspective, they control the fiber basket, they control the mill, they control the production plant, and probably they control the fab. How important is vertical integration for those aspects?
That's a really good question. And I think I get asked that probably bi-weekly, and I can be convinced of each answer. I've heard all the answers in that story. And I think it really depends more specifically on the partner and their strengths and weaknesses. So the first question is, how well can that partner play with others? They can't play well in the sandbox with others if they don't build those relationships. It's all about people at the end of the day. They are going to have to vertically integrate a lot because they can't make those form as relationships to complete on what they're trying to do. But if you can form those relationships, I think there's parts of the value chain where maybe you occupy 2 or 3 portions of it. But that whole value chain takes out a long time to develop. Although I think we will see in the next few years, a few more organizations who are demonstrating that entire value chain, which means they're a very complex, well-funded, well-diversified, knowledgeable organization. And those take a while to grow. So we've seen some instances where maybe those types of organizations tried to grow too fast and they blew out a few rivets, and there's lots of stories about those, but it's a process, reiterating, learning from the last experiences and moving on.
So thank you for that. That kind of helps address some of the issues, because I've also heard both sides of the coin. And so I like to talk to people that are much smarter than me, just like you, and see where they're falling, right? Because if one horse is telling you one thing and the other horse is telling you the other thing, like they're obviously speaking from their best interest, right? They're not going to say, yeah, our model's not the best. You need to go with that guy. Like obviously that doesn't make good business. So we talked a lot about where the mass timber like manufacturing is at right now, like where we're designing and building these structures, but kind of like back to the basics, like why would a developer owner even want to use mass timber in the first place? Like what are the benefits to them other than I like the way it looks? Like that's great, but people don't, if it doesn't pencil, they don't build it. Right.
Yeah.
And so like, sometimes it's like, oh, that's pretty, I'm willing to pay this much more for it, but there's got to be more to it than that. Like, why do you think that people are choosing to use mass timber?
Well, so I've done lots of projects where why wood was a biophilia answer and people just love seeing it. I love wood, but I do worry in the long run, maybe that's an architectural trend. 10, 15 years, architectural trends are long and slow, but who knows what people think. I still hope people love wood. That's not the main reason in my books to build out of it. The main reason right now goes into that digital fabrication, speed of construction, known costs and known control. So the known costs might sound scary to people outside the industry, but for me, having worked, estimating, running these large projects for a long time, once I plug in that model to my computer system, I know all the fabrication time and the cost of every part, the number of sticks of lumber, the pounds of glue in there, the hours a CNC machine's going to spend. Because we've pre-designed that in that digital realm, we know all the costs. There is a variable commodity market pushing the lumber behind that, but we know all the known quantities that we can control within that spectrum. And I think that's going to grow further.
Quick question. How much does it cost for a developer owner to get to that answer, right? To get to those models to plug in. So like if somebody's like, I know I can build this building with concrete and steel. I built 100 other of them. It's going to cost this much. The sub team is going to bid me this amount per square meter, per square foot or whatever. But mass timber, you would have to approach it entirely differently if you want to take all the advantages of. And so I know that this is an overarching, maybe too broad and vague question, but if somebody is looking at, hey, I know what I can build this building for traditionally, I want to look at mass timber, but is it going to cost me $100,000 to figure out whether I want to do it or not? Like, how do you address that?
It absolutely should not cost $100,000 to figure that out. A few years ago, there's a lot of temperature water tasting to see how it would work. I think there's a lot of expertise in the industry now and groups who do that as their standard kit of parts. Many structural engineers and architects who've done a number of projects, they can quickly analyze right up front, what would this look like in steel, concrete, or mass timber? And they've developed the programs behind that. Not only those groups have developed the programs, but there's a number of software groups that I think we'll hear more about soon that are bringing even better programming tools to quickly allow you to analyze what does this structure look like in mass timber. It's going to be a ROM cost. It's rough order of magnitude cost, probably plus or minus 20%, but it's still going to be good enough to say, yes, this makes enough sense. I'm going to push this to the next level and get engaged with do design beyond the schematic phase or something. But it should not be a long process. Maybe that's because I've worked on it for a while. Older groups might have more difficulty bringing that together, but I believe the tools, the consultants, engineers, architects are all out there and they can help today with low input costs to see what the outcome would be in mass timber.
Got it. And you mentioned something like things that are coming that are going to help the industry, whether that's software, tools, just general experience of like, we got some more data on our side. Like what do you think is coming next for mass timber?
I think we're going to see a number of parametric design softwares that come out. Some are led by engineering firms, some are led by manufacturing firms, some are led by technology firms on their own. So not answering any specifics, but we'll hear about them all at upcoming conferences. And those tools, we'll see what the levels of adoption, but each time, even if they don't all work, you're pushing the bar 5-10% higher. And that information enters the public realm. And then it becomes more known. Oh, if we do this type of connection, this type of grid, this type of whatever, this is what really works. And we're going to drive down our costs and we're going to know it's cost competitive. I think BC Housing just finished a study where they proved the net present value of three mass timber buildings that were also designed in steel and concrete, and found that the net present value of the mass timber buildings was much better compared to the other two alternatives. It's a very large scale study on 3 12-story buildings, I believe.
So you have some of like these analytical things that you can look at and you can use to justify, like, do you think that there's any material advancements, manufacturing advancements that are coming that people that are looking into mass timber that are designing with it right now need to be aware of so that they can continue to stay on kind of like that cutting edge?
Yeah. So I don't think the material is going to change drastically. We've demonstrated a lot of, the very high strength CLT and glulam system. There's a couple ways you can push it another 5 or 10%, but there's reasons they're not the industry standard today. But we will see a lot more hybrid construction. And that will be concrete composite timber systems. A number of those have been done, but the magic behind those is getting that cost parity and structural performance to the right level. And as more manufacturers come online and more boutique manufacturers come online, we'll see a lot more groups willing to do, a prefab concrete composite slab in their region, subject to shipping distances, to make that work on site. So a lot more composite hybrid systems will come together. But beyond that, back to the leaders and laggards of the world, I think it's going to be a system optimization. So the main changes we're going to see is that throughput time from that quote at a schematic design or design development to delivery on site. And those digital tools in there are going to shorten that design time significantly. When people often ask, what's the lead time for a mass timber project? And they're trying to talk about the physical manufacturing from ordering material at a new plant. That's generally not the bottleneck, is the plant's production time. The bottleneck is the people time to design the building to that fabrication level down to a 30-second of an inch. And that's what has to happen for every single connection on the building. That's the bottleneck, getting that designed, approved, reviewed, and sent to the fabrication facility. That's where I think the optimization is going to happen in 5 years. Again, leading to this schedule certainty for new clients.
So mass timber is hot, new, cool, and trendy. Like you're just seeing very exponential growth every year in like the people that are producing it, the buildings that are getting built, the overall square footage, the building count, if you will. Uh, do you think that there are going to be more entrants into the production side over the next 2 to 5 years that will create more competition in the market? And then what do you think that that will do to prices and to efficiency?
Yeah, so that's my area of expertise right now. I'll have to be a little guarded about what we say there, but I think there will be a significant number of new entrants, both on the West and East Coast of North America, also the US South. And these entrants, some will be existing groups adding a new plant, and some will be brand new business entities who are looking to explore different parts of the value chain, like we talked about before. In terms of projections for what that's going to do to the market, right now, if we continue on the growth rates we've been on, there will be a shortage of fabrication abilities in the market. Those growth rates,
Fab-
sorry,
fa-
go ahead.
So you specifically said a shortage of fabrication, but not necessarily manufacturing, or you?
Yeah. So to me, I consider modern mass timber is when you are supplying a kit of parts that is framed and fabricated. If you're just producing billets, just big boxes of glulam billets, that has been done since, the 60s. And there's many outfits out there that do that. Although a lot of them are starting to modernize now and add CNC capabilities and provide project design services. So to make a distinction between, for me, that's mass timber is a kit of parts, not just the raw billet of material.
Got it. Got it. And so you think that there will be a shortage based on demand in the future. Do you think that that will translate to mass timber then kind of creeping back up into the premium price range and then no longer being feasible? Or do you think that
So
it's
have to be very temperamental about the comment. So the shortage is based on the growth rates we've seen. I think it's somewhere, depending on who you talk to, between 35 and 43% year over year growth. And certainly my experience in industry was sort of 50%, depending on what year it was, because there's obviously a couple hiccup years that have happened recently, but still growth overall. And right now, I believe, over the next 4 years, we're on a precipice of a much larger growth explosion as this becomes from a, niche market to a really standardized product. And then after that, we'll see sort of like the late adopters that is maybe down to like 10%, call that 5 years out from now. But for the next 5 years, I think we're going to see a huge amount of growth in demand. And what's going to limit that demand is production capacity. After that, there will be a large market that might still only be 5% of construction. But that is so much larger than today. It's absolutely insane to even imagine that. And we will hit natural limits that we can sustain with our fiber resources. And the question then becomes, we want to use this fiber in the best quality we can for the longest lasting endeavor. And, if we're designing these buildings right, they're lasting 200 plus years. And that means, we could regrow those forests multiple times over in that period. And that's really the definition of sustainability to me.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have to cut down a tree, you want to make sure it's going to its highest and best use. I think I heard that from a gentleman by the name of Brent told me, and it kind of stuck with me. And that's my throw out phrase. But it totally makes sense. I mean, yes, it's renewable, right? But just because it's renewable doesn't mean you can be willy nilly with what you're making out of it, right? Like, yeah, you need toilet paper, but toilet paper doesn't last very long. Right? You got to cut down another tree and make more toilet paper, right? But when you're putting the fiber into, like you said, 200-year structures, which is a great number. And I'm glad that you use that number because I've seen in the world of social media comments, something about we shouldn't be using mass timber to make buildings that are only going to last 50 or 60 years. I said, first, you better not be designing any buildings that only last 50 or 60 years. I don't care what you use. That's a bad building, right?
Yeah.
Second, we can build them to last much longer.
Yeah. Yeah. Back to how we started this conversation, history of mass timber. One of the things I was really interested in was how many old timber buildings are there? And there's hundreds of mass timber buildings that are over 500 years old. There's a couple that are around and over 1,000 years old. They're
Mm-hmm.
usually temples in Japan or China. There's a couple in Northern Europe that are nearing 900 years right now. But if you design right, which is mostly just keep water off of it, that's the design, right? It's not rocket science. These buildings will last.
Yep. Yeah. I'm obviously a little biased, but I am a big fan. So for people that are listening, if they're an architect, an engineer, and developer, construction guy, if you can impart one piece of wisdom to them that will help them through this growth in mass timber over the next 5 years, what would it be?
I think people matter most, and building those relationships, working with people you like to work with, asking good questions, and spending that time slowing down a little bit. The only time I ever sort of learned something new was when I took a bit longer with someone to really understand that motivation, that process, that whatever that was happening. Not only did build a relationship during that period of time you spent together, but you gain this new insight to unlock whatever the next thing is to make it work. So we developed a number of new products in North America, and that took a while to figure out, oh, we can put MSR lumber. We don't have to use 2 better. Sounds very simple right now, but that came from a lot of conversations with lumber suppliers and code officials to figure out how to put that together.
Working in the manufacturing space is your bread and butter, your area of expertise. What did you mean by that?
Yeah. So right now I'm running my own consulting firm, Whirlwind Consultants, and that area is helping build business plans for entities working in the mass timber space, whether that's value added manufacturing, billet manufacturing, design services, or going from the forest all the way through to the final product and that whole chain. What I really like doing is crazy Excel sheets, and that allows me to impart a lot of variables onto an Excel sheet and create a business simulation model out of that.
Got it. Got it. And so I'm sure a lot of your projects you can't necessarily talk about openly, but what kind of projects are you working on now? And then like, what are you hoping to be doing in the future?
Yeah, so there's a number of facilities on both coasts. There's probably one that's had a little pre-info coming out in Halifax. It's under a due diligence process, hopefully shortly. But these new facilities will be cutting edge in terms of fabrication abilities, and more importantly, to me, that process behind the fabrication. Anyone can buy equipment right now, but the process of how you deliver projects is the most important part. And that usually involves having the right people in the right place with the right skills and training everyone on how to do that. So there's a lot going on in HR to make that happen. I think there was a question on how to reach out to me. Is that at the end, Brian?
Yeah. Like, what you're doing now, that's what we covered. And then like, what are you are you going to continue to do that into the future? Or are you looking to branch off in any certain direction? Like, what can we expect to see Nick doing in the future?
Yeah. In the future, that's a good question. I like to uncover lots of rocks and see what's most interesting. As we talked about a few times, that process of the delivery system and simplifying it to maximize the value and the certainty of that. It's where I'm most interested right now, but I could be anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
If we
loose
all
there.
had a crystal ball, right?
Yeah. Anything that's exciting, involves wood, I'll probably have a finger in it. So
If you, Nick, could change anything in the industry, anything at all, what would it be and why?
there's fortunately, can't make up my mind that there's multiple things I would change, but the first thing would be a standardized design guide and knowledge database to access that is very inclusive and open to everyone and easy to navigate. We have many organizations with different parts right now, hard to figure out. Next one would be digital modeling review. Just drives me nuts. We go from 2D drawings to 3D model to 2D drawings again. That's about 60% of the design time. That needs to be shortened down to 10% by staying in the 3D model. And the third one, I believe some other guests have talked about this, but is maximizing the value returned to the log. So doing earlier log sorting up front, what's the end value for this log, and having a distribution network from that log profile that we can send it to the right value proposition. If that's going to be glulam lam stock, CLT lam stock, pellets, dimensional lumber. But right now people bid on logs and it just goes to wherever that bidder is instead of being optimized to the real value of the log. They're tech solutions in so much as every tech solution to me is more of a people solution. It's a complicated answer, but you need the people with the vision to implement the technology and the knowledge to do that. Everyone would do that if they had it up front, but it's really what people have those visions. How can they simplify it? And are they willing to do that? So yes, they sit on the backbone of technology, but it's the visionaries behind it that will implement that. And that is what we are in the shortage of.
All right. I like that answer. All right. And then circling back to the point you brought up, like if somebody wants to get in touch with you for consulting services, how do they do that?
Yeah, I have a small, very poor website out there, but you can contact me on the website or just look me up on LinkedIn. I'm quite responsive to any of that.
We'll link both of those, your website and LinkedIn, down in the description below for anybody that wants to check you out. Well, this has been great. I love talking about mass timber, kind of getting a history lesson to where we are now, to where everybody's thinking that we're going, kind of like some hidden nuggets of wisdom and things that people should be watching out for. So thanks for having this conversation with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. This is quite a pleasure.